Let's talk about Night of the Shark by Bruce Cordell, which is a second edition Dungeons and Dragons adventure. It is the second in a trilogy, the Sahuagin trilogy, after Eviltide, before Sea of Blood. I've reviewed Eviltide on this channel before. Night of the Shark can be used as a standalone resource. It's actually particularly fitting to based on what's actually in it compared to Eviltide and to a far greater extent Sea of Blood, which are... While Sea of Blood certainly doesn't feel like a standalone, Eviltide benefits from fitting into a wider story, though it is very good. Night of the Shark is both the most standalone worthy, also in a way one of the most interesting, but perhaps the weakest entry in the trilogy. I'm going to talk about it fairly briefly, I hope, rather than one of the hour-long odysseys that we take. Because though there's good stuff in it, it's a 32-page module, it's relatively simple, and it's not a Gygax era 32-page module, you know, we're talking much less text per page. Yeah, it's got two sections, or rather three. Let's say it's got the superstructure, the meta structure of how the adventure works, plus things like, I mean, there are two new novel arcana, 3 novel arcana, so, you know, new magic items or whatever. And then the adventure itself consists of 2 major components. One is on a ghost ship, and one is in some caves in a seamount. And these do connect, but they are also somewhat disconnected. They're actually not... neither of them are directly connected to the wider plot. Only the prologue, the meta-adventure, is connected to the wider plot of the trilogy. They deal with Sahuagin and with other sea-related things, and they still use, therefore, heavily the DMG reference of ships in the sea. I think it's DMGR9 or whatever, maybe DMGR7, but it's more like that's why it's standalone. Now, the ghost ship section is very strong on the whole. The seamount section is interesting, really good material in it, and enjoyable, but less strong. The first thing to say then is let's talk about the meta-adventure stuff. Basically, I mean, it gives several pages of introduction about, like, oh, this is where characters might have come from. This is what happened in Eviltide. This is how to connect Eviltide to this story. This is Lorish Sampry, the human level 10 wizard who might be helping you. And then it particularly says, you know, if the characters succeeded in the first one, they've got the stone which abides, which is the big MacGuffin that's relevant, particularly in the Sea of Blood. We need to get it off them, so Baron Cathstram and an army of Sahuagin, well, a battalion, you know, a company of Sahuagin and some giant sharks appear and attack the party, leave them for dead, taking the stone which abides, and, you know, gives stats, and it gives that as a combat you can run. Now, this indicates an issue, the way that's presented indicates an issue in Night of the Shark, which I also found in Sea of Blood, and much less so, I would say, in Eviltide, but then Eviltide's the introduction. It's basically a railroad, which Cordell is obviously apologetic for. I think it's in Sea of Blood where he says, you know, you don't really want to railroad your players or force them to do stuff they don't want to, but, you know, you just got to get them here. There's this weird thing in Cordell's best work where you can tell that he is kicking against the pricks a bit as he writes a bit of bad advice or as he fits stuff in, and you can tell his heart isn't there. But basically, these are adventures that are linked together, and they're released sequentially. They're not released as one big sandbox. They're released sequentially, that you buy one, then the next. And in that sense, you could say, why is that any different to the G series? Less so the D series, where there is actually a kind of a theoretical hex crawl. But the G series, and I grant that, but it feels much more forced here, and Cordell knows it, and it's why he offers many ways that you could get to this point, but also says, look. And essentially, what he's saying is, if you want to play this, you've got to get them there. What I actually did with Night of the Shark was because now, if you just say your players get hired to have the stone which abides, it is legitimate to just say, well, then they get attacked. However, what had happened here was they'd gone somewhere on the hex map, gone and got something, and then left. And it felt a lot more forced to say, no, they have to have something bad happen to them to drag them into the events of this, especially because it meant they were like going home, and this would drag them off somewhere else, and it would stop their own plans, and you want player action to be player driven. They'd gone out to the island in the first adventure, yes, but they hadn't chosen to go out into the deep sea. So I actually just made it a random encounter, and it was on a D8, but, you know, there were several chances on this D8 coming up with a 1, and of course I could have kept that encounter for later. If the stone which abides ever leaves again, you know, one may presume it might, but it might not have, then the encounter happens. Baron Castram attacks. It did happen. This party of my players' characters was the weakest technically of theirs, with a kind of net level of probably level 4 or so. So quite weak. These are adventures for 6 to 8. And so they lost the Stone Which Abides. If it had been one of the other sub-parties they had running around, hey, maybe it could have been a stand-up fight. As it was, they did lots of damage. But, that was fine. They lost it. It was a legitimate result that happened out of organic play. So you can fix it, but you've got to be aware that these just say, look, you play one, then the next, then the next. It makes me think, in fact, and maybe obviously, of adventure paths later in 3rd edition and Pathfinder, and you think, what a curse that is. And of course, you can blame Gary with the G series, but I think you can see the real development with things like this, where there's no tournament expectation. There's no highly competitive gaming expectation. This is just, you're telling stories at the table, and there are a few other instances where this kind of mindset comes up, like there is in the Seamount, there's a Sahuagin prince in disguise from a different city, not the City of Abiding Hunger, which is where you'll end up in Sea of Blood. Sea of Blood is by far the worst for this whole thing, by the way. But this prince, it says, he's going to matter, make sure he doesn't die. Castram, there's some of the same comment on an Evil Tide. Of course you can replace these characters, but you can see the mindset is there. There is a story and you need to take part. And this is nowhere near as difficult as in the Giovanni Chronicle or something in Vampire the Masquerade at the same time. But yeah, bear that in mind. With that said, assuming you can cope with that, my players did get dragged off to the Ghost Ship and then the Seamount. We've got maps. These are by Dennis Korth or Court and Rob Lazzaretti. Rob Lazzaretti, mostly known, I think, for his Planescape maps. And yeah, they're actually pretty clear. I liked them. I found them pretty easy to parse. One or two moments, say with the ship map, where I had to have a second look. Here is the Seamount. You can see it is nominally 2 level. You've got 1 level up here and another level down here. And yeah, they're all pretty clear, not amazing, but they will do the job, and they're not overly stylized either. So here's the thing, the first section is in a ghost ship, and that's amazing. Ghost ships are interesting and fun. Your characters are lost at sea, and a creepy ship turns up, and it's got a rope on the side, and they go up, and there's nobody on it. It's amazing. Now, this is the kind of concept that goes easily wrong, because we don't, as writers, when we design adventures, I suspect many designers aren't very good at horror or fear or anticipation. And it's maybe hard to fit a certain idea of, oh, this is going to be how it's intimidating and scary onto an explorable environment rather than a movie script. But here, Cordell does a really good job. Basically, the fortunate son, a terrible experiment went wrong. The captain got confused, basically thought some magic research he'd found could be done to make a human really capable underwater using necromantic magic, transferring life from a shark into a person. And it happened, but it kind of went very wrong, and both the dead shark became alive and a problem, and the fellow that she had healed, technically with the shark, Tim, became the Apocalypse. And the Apocalypse is this horrendous monster who ends up at the Seamount, which is the relevant connection there, who kills all the crew, and Sharoni, the captain, she's left as a ghost looking for some way to solve her problem, to redeem herself, to remove this great evil she's released. And yeah, though I would say there are some issues of like 90s onward overwriting. You've got there the Great Cabin is nearly a page long, and though the Great Cabin is actually pretty good, it's very detailed. There's some sense that probably bullet pointing, and this is a modern attitude, but then you think, no, in the 70s you have bullet point lists. Bullet pointing stuff that's in there rather than putting it in full sentences might be better. There are zombies in there. Now the zombies throughout and the ghouls as well, have black gunk that can be a fungal infection. That's creepy and annoying. And then in that particular room, as an example, there's just loads of interesting stuff. There is if you can find the secret door, and you can find the secret door easily if you're mapping. This is a dungeon that rewards mapping. There are 2 secret areas. You can see roughly them both there. One is on the top layer, on the middle layer, sorry, and one is on the bottom near the back of the ship. these secret areas can be found if you map. And so Cordell really rewards good dungeoneering. But you go below, you go into this great cabin, say, you fight some weird black goo-covered zombies who might infect you with stuff. They are, of course, immune to sleep charm, death magic, poisons, and cold-based spells. And you find the secret thing, and you can get some treasure, gold-plated compass, map of distant coasts inked in gold. But you can also get a spell book, but the spell book has a sepia snake sigil on it, which is a hilarious spell. The chest is locked, but much like the secret door, it's locked with a poisonous needle inside lots of potions. 4 potions of cure light wounds, 2 of water breathing, 1 of protection from water elementals, and a +2 dagger of water breathing. Incredible load of equipment. So you can see immediately, for a level 6 to 8 party, Cordell is putting opportunities to find a powerful spellbook with up to 5th level spells in it, and because I think Shrony is a 10th level wizard, and just a box full of great stuff in it, but all of it is coming at these increasing risks on this mappable, explorable ghost ship. And the rooms throughout you're going to rooms, once you've had the first bad thing happen, you're going into rooms and you're like, what is going to be in here? There is, precisely because except for the undead shark, Cordell doesn't just make stuff jump out at you all the time. That's actually good, because though you could say, well, what about the wandering monster table? How about making it creepy that way? It creates an environment in which players become worried about doing stuff because they know their action is what triggers bad stuff happening. If they're there at night, the shark can come and attack them. But the creepiest thing on the ship is something called the progeny. We do have a picture here. It's a pretty good picture. You might struggle to get the horror via the picture on the camera. They are described as... does it have a decent description here? Progeny. Let's see new monsters. The Apocalypse is one new monster. The other is its progeny. Progeny normally hang in tight coils of squamous flesh that look like wasp nests formed by a single coiled snake. When unfurled, progeny generally reach 2 feet in length, resembling eyeless serpents with shark-like mouths filled with row after row of sharp teeth. And they're dropping from the ceiling in all these rooms. They're actually not weak either. They've got 3+3 HD, Thaco 17. The big thing, though, is just how horrendous their attack is. They deliver a bite once per round. If they successfully bite, they hang on and begin to burrow into the victim toward the spinal column, inflicting hit points each round. They get there in 1d4 plus 2 rounds, whereupon the creature automatically paralyzes the host and then begins to subsume the host, digesting and replacing both the spinal column and the lower brainstem of the victim, which takes 6 full rounds and again continues to do damage per round. It looks horrible, it acts horribly, it's on these broken, weird, creepy rooms. There's some that are hidden under a fallen bookshelf, for instance, and players are going to lift that because there's treasure there. So all this bad stuff's happening. Oh, and by the way, they also can subsume your spinal column and brain and turn you into a baby apocalypse, which is what happened to Tim. This dark necromantic magic, which you can find, it has created just this awful body horror thing, which is a Cordellian signature. So, maybe what else to say about the ghost ship? The last thing I'll say is the Necton fragments are a really fun thing. There is a room where the library, where everything is covered in the black goo, obviously the necrotic power, apart from a stone pedestal whose magic has kept it clean and free, and on it is Glowman's Necton fragments, which are Glowman's talking about, and there's 2 things this book can teach you. 1, it can teach you to swim better, and that is the thing that can happen in game, and 2, it can teach you how to kind of use this magical process to make someone able to breathe underwater and whatever, and it uses necrotic magic because it's from a dead shark or whatever, to make the living host stronger. And there's a chance that your players will read it and think it can work. The Ghost of Shrony thinks it can work. Your players might read it and think it can work. There was a chance of them thinking that. And you just think, oh my word, there is a player out there who, when they think it works, will be like, yeah, let's go and do it. That sounds amazing. And just create yet another apocalypse. So the second half, so the ghost ship is creepy. It's an explorable environment. Like a lot of Cordell modules, well, like lots of Cordell modules, it's good on body horror and sort of creepy, cringy psychological stuff where you're like, well, this stuff's going to eat my brain. You're finding skeletons, you're finding clues of battle. Like lots of Cordell modules, it has strong investigation and lots of combat. Cordell has, in lots of his modules, comparatively few, I would argue, strong role-playing opportunities. There are some. There's a great encounter in Moyle, the city that waits, for instance, that I can think of. There's Museo in the first book, in this Eviltide, who got killed by that creepy warning system that had been left by the eel people in the sea caves. Museo the Sea Elf and Loris Sampri. My players love Sampri. But here, really, you're talking about the kind of exploration of hostile environments. And there are a few more opportunities as we go to make friends, but it's just worth, paying attention to that as well. If your players hate that, if you're going to hate mid-level AD&D style combat, these might not be for you. The Seamount. The ship takes you to the Seamount. So you've cleared stuff out, you found stuff you might have found Shrine of the Ghost. You don't have to get there. Players will also usually put it together if they realise they're travelling and they stop over a Seamount. So my players went down and explored. So this is a temple to an avatar of Sekala, the god of Sahuagin. And the problem is, not so much for the Sahuagin who don't know and so they're having a great time, but for you, your players, is that the avatar is not in fact an avatar of Sekala, but is the Apocalypse. And there's two levels. One, there is a small, relatively small upper level. This is one thing, it's not a massive dungeon, and one of my criticisms of the Seamount is that compared to a 39 location semi-looping with a couple of ways up and down in a few places, or a couple of options for exploration at least, not really up and down, but round and round options in the boat. It's a simple map, but it's solid. The Seamount is pretty simple. It has technically 7 locations in the upper area, of which one is just a door, and it has 14 locations in the lower area. And the lower area has a map which has lots of by routes and loops. It's actually quite good in that sense. You can see that that's actually technically a vertical map as well. Up, down are the cardinal directions. But the problem is that of those possibly pushing 30 rooms, only 14 are detailed. There is a random encounter chart, but it's not a super detailed one. And so it does feel to me... in fact, the unnumbered encounters consist of a D4 roll, which are either Progeny, Sahuagin Penitence, Sea Elf Sacrifices, or a Deadfall. That's a very weak encounter table. And it's interesting that on this, by far the loopiest and most interconnected map of the 3 dungeon maps in this, it has the least detail, and though it has a random encounter chart, it feels like an afterthought. And I think that's probably a Cordellian stylistic thing. It's not where his general design instincts go. I say that Dawn of the Overmind has some decent encounter charts from memory. But the Seamount, you go in, you're fighting more Sahuagin. The Sahuagin react intelligently. If they discover you, or if they realise you're there, they will send troops to different areas, some to intercept you, to trap you, to launch ambushes, and others to protect the central shrine area. There's a priestess who is there is a great giant clam trap at the first point of ambush, which I approve of, where unless players are intentionally going on the ceiling, they will swim over an area which has these kinds of obscured giant clams, obscured in the rock fall on the floor, who then grab their feet, and you've got to bend bars, and if you bend bars, you rip your leg, and and otherwise you have to kill it, and it's got AC -2, AC 0, these giant clams. So, all for the giant clam trap. And then you've got Wanana Lennon, who is a 5th level cleric, Sahuagin cleric. Her room is actually really interesting because there are things like things that are chairs but just look like weird curvy pillars. Then there's a wall of woven kelp in which she hides her stuff and sleeps, rather than sleeping on the ceiling net where the other Sahuagin would sleep. And then there's these weird ropes of knotted kelp or something, which are actually spellbooks, but your players probably won't realise that because they're not Sahuagin. But they might. One thing is if they use detect magic and ask about them. If you are like me, you identify scrolls and spellbooks as magical via detect magic, then they will work it out. They might not work it out what it is, but they'll work out that they're valuable. One interesting thing here, or two interesting things. One, there is this kind of cool Sahuagin, prince from a different city, who has cool magic and stuff, and gives an alternative challenge who might come and join the fight. And two, there are some sea elves you can free in the Chamber of the Penitent, as well as, and this is a cool thing, these kind of crippled Sahuagin who have come here to be eaten by the Eater as sacrifices to Sekala. The layer of the Eater itself, so you fight them, then you go down. And of course, there's some question about, like, well, why are my players doing this? I think when your players are on a ghost ship they can't control, because it doesn't... I mean, they could potentially try to fix the rudder, but the ghost controls it unless they banish the ghost. So they can banish the ghost, that is possible. I'm trying to think what kind of magic they need. But assuming if they are 6 to 8 with Loris Sampri, they can do some damage. Oh, they can turn by then, can't they? So there are some options. But likely, they're going to realise that the ship wants them to go down. So they're going to go down. Players... In that sense, that is an acceptable railroad in my view. If the players stay on the boat and they can try to swim, they can do whatever they want. They can try to find a ghost to banish. They can try to repair the rudder. But and there is even usable rope on the ship for that. But if they stay there, they're going to have to go into the into the thing. Once they go down there are a few interesting things. One, there is a room with 24 progeny. There is a Ixachitl who you can ally with, but will betray you when they want to, but who doesn't want to be there, who has made a little kind of base, and will try to escape with you. And one thing, there is a treasure map, which you can see there. You can get off this Ixachitl, which isn't detailed here, but which is just a cool thing, which is like, hey, you decide what's on it. I don't mind that kind of undetailed stuff in modules pointing beyond itself, because it helps create the wider world. And you're buying the books that you're buying. You're not buying everything this guy ever comes up with. There is another potential ally, is a sea elf called Kois, who is not a sea elf. They're a Malenti, because did you know, how many is it? Is it 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000? Something madly high like that. 1 in X Sahuagin is born looking like a sea elf, and it's kind of dumb. It is a thing in the Sahuagin trilogy. But in the end, who cares? This is you got elves, elves in the sea to begin with. There is something darkly hilarious about the possibility of having rescued Museo. She's your friend. She's there. She meets this other guy who knows enough about sea elves to blag it, and then he ends up betraying you. And you're like, what happened? Why did he betray us? Oh no, he was just a Sahuagin all along. There are lore reasons for this. So Koi's... potentially that's a weak point, how far it sets up a betrayal based on a stupid piece of information you probably won't know. But it's kind of funny. I laughed. There is, then, disgustingly, there is the cast-off skin of the Apocalypse hanging in the water in an enormous cavern that goes down vertically. And if you kind of dip into it, and there's not really anything valuable in there, but if you dip into it, there's 2 whites. That is a screw you room. That is a classic screw you trap room. There is, and this is kind of cool. This is a good one. So the problem is there's not enough of this in this lower section. There's 14 rooms, and there are kind of many screw you rooms. 24 progeny, that is a screw you room. On the other hand, Ixachitl, that's helpful. Kois the Malenti probably wants to help you, because they want to get out. And so in that sense, you can pick up a bit of a party. You might meet some sea elves on the random encounter table, and the actual encounters that are here are good. It's just there's too few of them. In fact, sorry, when I say there are 14, there aren't 14. There's 8, because there's 14 in the whole complex. So yeah, there's 8. That's the whole problem. There's only 8 locations in this dungeon. But what there is cool. The white one is cool. And it is a screw you one. There is the back end of a whale, the skeleton end of a whale. Well, no, in fact, it's a underwater purple worm, which can still move around and sting but can't move. So if you go near it because you want to find out what's going on, it has a one last save versus death sting. And killing it, I mean, it's 1400 XP. That's not nothing even at 7th level for a party. The final point, though, is the Eater, there is the purple wormtail. And the Eater has, again, the art in this is so evocative. I should check who's doing the interior art. Todd Lockwood. So there is the Eater. Do you see the faces coming out of the flesh it's consumed and joined into its body? So yeah, the Apocalypse is the final thing you fight. It's just going to be a very big fight. There's not much else to that. 5,000 XP. Armor class 0, 13 hit dice, 4 attacks, and it has a swallow attack in there as well. When it's aggressive, it does not stop hunting its lair until it's found every last living creature until it's permanently killed. Because of the haze in the water in the room that it's in, you suffer penalties. This is one thing, the underwater combat in this sucks. As in it, not in a bad way, it's a real challenge, but it is just a serious thing. There is just challenge after challenge. You need parties who have magic items, you need parties who have swimming as a skill, things like that, as an NWP, or athletics if you're adapting it to a later edition or whatever. You really got to have well-tooled, clever parties who can deal with the kind of war of attrition you fight against the Sahuagin in their dungeons. I should say, for all I said then about the combat thing, Cordell does take different approaches in the Illithid trilogy, and to a degree certainly in Return to the Tomb of Horrors and the Shattered Circle. Its Firestorm Peak is very much more a combat one as well. But here versus this military command economy, sort of centralizing dictatorship of the Sahuagin, war of attrition versus organised relentless foes is fitting. It is a particular style. But yeah, so you slay this thing, and Shironi will be happy with what you've done and take you where you want to go. However, you have really upset all the Sahuagin who thought the Eater was actually an avatar of Sakala. There's also then the spores of the Eater, which include, platinum flatware worth 300 GP, 1,000 gold, 10 gems worth 20 gold each, 2,356 silver. It's not in that sense an incredible haul, except that, and a ring of contrariness. But most importantly, though, there is Foebreaker, which is a +3 longsword, which can be used by a wizard and ignores AC adjustment from armor worn by opponents. It's neutral good. It will backbite evil, or potentially backbite evil wielders, and it also has daily powers: inflict ×2 damage against evenly aligned opponents, spell turning 75%, and dimension door the wielder and up to 2 additional companions. So I don't want to get down or get down too badly on the second dungeon. I think it's basically just comparatively weak. It doesn't have enough detail. There's a pressure of having 2 major dungeons, really. By that I mean both of which could be a 40-room dungeon. One is 39, the other is 14, but could be 30 or 40 room. There is a danger there of when you've got these big double columns with fairly large text, like 12 point or whatever, you're running the risk, aren't you, of running out of space. And I think they run out of space, and that's why that second dungeon suffers. The first one, the ghost ship, is one. It's also the more interesting one, the more interesting concept. We've already had an underwater dungeon, so having the ghost ship, having this kind of bottle episode in every the Next Generation sense, this bottle episode where you're stuck on this thing and you've got to work out the kind of creepy mystery, and there is a whole environment you can explore. Mapping matters, combat tactics matter, etc. So does finding a safe place, and there is a safe place set up, I should mention, which with Lorish using Knock and Wizard Lock can set up as a safe place for you overnight. All these things make that one of the most interesting mid-level adventure modules I've read, but on its own it'd actually be very short. It'd be 8 pages, I guess, of a first edition module, and the second half just doesn't quite live up to that, despite having this awful, horrifying opponent, this weird, creepy environment, and some really interesting treasure. I will move on in due time to Sea of Blood, I guess, and we'll talk about that, and I'll do some other Cordell again in the future. I guess put your requests in below. What do you think of the Sahuagin Trilogy if you've played it or run it? Tell me in the comments below, and tell me your other favourite Bruce Cordell modules, and indeed second edition modules. Till next time.